Hi people, this is really, really serious. To listen to this, and do check the links underneath. I'll be leaving you all the links. I've got a lot of information to share here because I'm connecting dots and presenting an accurate perspective and picture of exactly what is going on right now and why we are in this situation. It's very important that people understand the full nature of the problem, because you can't fix a problem if you don't understand exactly what the problem is. So we're starting here now, and this is why I'm making this video, is in direct response now to Michael Gove, who, it's really serious. Brexiteer MPs seek law to jail British citizens who undermine Brexit negotiations abroad. Tory MPs are pushing for new laws that would see British citizens face prison if they attempt to undermine or derail Brexit negotiations while abroad, following claims of unauthorised shadow negotiations. So what this is about is the fact that British MPs and British citizens have been visiting members of EU Parliament and other EU governments to seek advice, like, for example, the Letwin Act and getting the Benn Act passed. Apparently he met with people at contacts at a French embassy in London. Naughty Mr. Letwin. He'd received help from the French government and EU members in hoping to pass the bill. And as a result, poor Mr. Johnson, he's been sent to the EU with one arm tied behind his back, while his opponents have shuttled back and forth, attempting to have the EU kick his legs out from under him. So, therefore, very serious consideration is likely to be given to new laws to deter unauthorised diplomatic activity with foreign actors with whom the government is in negotiation and disagreement. Meanwhile, because apparently these shadow negotiators have undermined the national interests and the jeopardising British statecraft. British statecraft, what are they? A set of witches? Actually, yes. So, meanwhile, Michael Gove has warned he will be implementing the next stage of Operation Yellowhammer, as the Letwin Agreement has now increased the chances of a no-deal Brexit. Well, the next stage of Operation Yellowhammer is actually martial law. Okay? Because this is part of the Brexit plans. Thousands of troops assisting police who will also be armed. And these troops can be corporate troops. DynCorp International, based in the UK, up for hire to the British government or any government, largely employed by America. A corporation, a military outfit. Are they going to be the troops on our streets, aiming guns at British people, with powers to enter our homes and confiscate property? All part of martial law, impose curfews, restrictions on freedom of movement. And then there's the threat that we have in any situation, as we know, on this planet, wherever you've got men with guns, with powers over a defenceless, unarmed population, oppressed, a hostile population, being governed by a hostile government, with military powers hostile to the public. Men with lusts. Who's going to protect the women and children? Women and children who will have all their rights stripped anyway. In fact, the whole of the British public will have all of our rights stripped anyway. So now he's threatening and threatening jail. Okay. And, you know, why have we got the Benn Act? Why have we got the Letwin Agreement? Because the British Parliament, MPs by majority, are defending the British people's interests. Because Britain is under attack, and I'm going to explain a few things now to you, Michael Gove. But one thing that British people need to understand is that this Brexit has got there's nothing whatsoever of advantage to the average British citizen. Absolutely nothing. Brussels does not rule us. The only thing Brussels does is protect our rights. Protect our rights to safe and healthy food and medicines, clean water, our human rights, our rights to justice. Okay? Brussels does not dictate. Those aren't dictations. Those are actually rights that Britain took into the EU, that Britain already had many of them before we went into the EU, and have actually helped to be formulated within the EU and applied. So these are just as much as British laws as they are EU laws. And British Parliament has stood up to defend British people's interests. And why have we had to do that? Why have we got Brexit? Well, everybody knows by now, yes, because of the EU tax regulations. Because, as I've explained before, if these tax regulations and restrictions on tax havens do not come into force, then every nation in the EU is going to end up like Greece, because the corporations take, they're giving nothing back. And we've all witnessed what's happened to Britain since on the onset of privatisation since Thatcher, how, you know, the more privatisations happen, you get less of a service. The axe jobs, people end up doing the work of 2 or 3 people. Wages are cut. The whole nation starts to be run down. They pay hardly any tax, and a lot of them receiving massive government subsidies, and especially the ones that are providing public services are actually receiving government funding. That's where they're getting their profits, paid for from the public purse, all leaving Britain into offshore tax havens. That's why the EU has had to put these regulations in place. They've been forced to, because otherwise these global corporations will literally bleed Europe dry and leave us with nothing. And we will all be owned by the corporation. That's the whole point of a trade union, with trade union laws to protect the workforce. That's the point of it, that we don't get exploited. Now, the EU's not banned the corporations. The corporations are operating within the EU, but the EU is saying that any corporation earning profits from any EU nation is going to pay their taxes. And that will include scrutiny then of all the businesses that are registered in Britain. And we know, as Gordon Bowden knows, as I've exposed repeatedly, that a lot of the businesses run in Britain are shell companies, are money laundering fronts, are fake businesses, basically, fake investment funds, there to drain investments, drain pension funds, drain trust funds, drain people's life savings. Scrutiny on all of those businesses could actually lead to jail for many prominent, wealthy British citizens, the majority of who back the Tory party, and then we've got the corporate interests that are going to lose out from their tax havens. So what we've got here is a situation where the corporation now is hoping to attack the EU from Britain. First of all, break off Britain, and from here, then attack the rest of the EU, as Nigel Farage is on record, Mr. Gove. Go and watch him on YouTube, on American news, stating, predicting that the EU will be very likely fall apart. The EU Union will break apart within 2 years of Brexit happening. This is an attack against the whole of the EU by global corporate interests. And the Tories have been colluding with foreign powers. Here we have Netanyahu, big corporate guy, actually far-right extremist, a criminal, under criminal investigations, as leader of Israel right now, himself under criminal investigations. He's there at Downing Street the day after Boris Johnson has unlawfully prorogued Parliament. A foreign power with vested interests, direct corporate connections, and direct interest in the very tax havens that Brexit is designed to protect. And he's there, colluding with our government against the interests of the British people. People who were lied to. And by a Prime Minister that himself even lies to the Queen and has been found that he unlawfully prorogued Parliament in order directly for the specific purpose of thwarting democracy. Because Parliament, he wanted to get his Brexit through. Now, he claimed to the Supreme Court that actually his proroguing of Parliament had nothing to do with Brexit. But then when the court found that his prorogation was unlawful, he turned round and said that the ruling was to frustrate Brexit and stop this country coming out of the EU. Well, you can't have it both ways, Boris Johnson, but you don't care, do you? Because that was an inflammatory statement, wasn't it? Designed to stir up the xenophobic wrath of your ground support of staunch Brexiteers, wasn't it? You know, the kind of people that attack British citizens, that murdered a British MP, a pro-Remain, pro-EU British MP, to convince them there's some conspiracy going on here. It is the British public, the state against the British public. That is your narrative. But it won't wash anymore. Because when you get over 1 million people marching through London twice, the majority of people in Britain do not want Brexit anymore. They were victims of lies. And they're not stupid. They're not stupid for having faith, for trusting, for believing in the BBC, for believing that you people are actually worthy of your positions. People have realised now the plot, the scheme, that no, it isn't about sovereignty for British people. It's about you lot keeping on to your tax breaks and your tax havens and your criminal business enterprises. For quite a few of you, staying out of jail. So you want to talk about colluding with foreign powers to undermine the British people's rights and everything that we fought for. You see, Michael Gove, Europe's been through 2 world wars. We've defeated fascism. We know what fascism is. It's in our collective memory. Yes, there might be corrupt elements within the EU who can be bought off with a wad of cash. But no, the majority of EU citizens have a moral backbone. And our rights cannot be bought nor sold. You see? And the EU is exactly right to demand taxes. Because an economy, it needs to be self-sustaining. Money needs to circulate, not being siphoned out like literally vampires bleeding us dry. Because ordinarily, if a nation's providing its own services, or it has its industries, its independently owned industries, and the people are paying taxes in that country, and the money, the wealth is circulating in that country, but how can an economy sustain itself when actually the wealth isn't circulating in the country, it's just being drained out into tax havens and going into operations like DynCorp? The corporation getting its own military armies together that are then up for hire for your government that are here, and then your government giving them legislation for the right to bring in as many troops as they like from abroad. So, if you want to talk about the law, Michael Gove, I'm going to explain the law to you now of exactly who it is that's been colluding with the enemy, who belongs in jail actually, who's a traitor, who's a threat to our national security, who's actually in the process of committing a terrorist attack against our nation, the nation of Britain. Because you've stated it all, you Tories, already, that you're happy to lose Scotland, Ireland, cause significant damage to the UK economy, even destroy your own party for the sake of Brexit. The only time you'd abandon Brexit is if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister, because you know damn well that you would not then be able to turn Britain into the tax haven that you have planned. Singapore on the Thames, Mr Javid, worked as a banker in Singapore, has spoken about using tax cuts and deregulation as part of a shock and awe strategy to transform the post-Brexit UK economy. Singapore on the Thames visionaries. Look, comprehensive deregulation, sweeping tax cuts, using tax wars as a fiscal weapon, removal of social and environmental protections, inviting illicit and corrupt financial flows into our country. Britain, a nation where one minister, or was it the DWP, has been recently stated, about offering women the option of prostitution at job centres as a career. So, you want to turn Britain into a tax haven. That's your next plan, isn't it? To turn Britain into a tax haven. Brexit Britain. Stuff the people. You've got your body bags piled up. You've already stated you've got no legal duty to provide food for people in the event of a hard Brexit or any other catastrophe. So you could literally starve us all if you wanted, apparently. Because we'll have no human rights, will we? But this is what it's about. Institutionalised corruption. Destroying lives everywhere. Many of the offshore tax havens are British Crown territories and are promoted and defended by the UK government. That's who you're protecting here, isn't it? The Crown territories tax havens. This is a report, 2002, written by British people and MP professionals, explaining the terrible dangers of tax havens and why they need to be challenged, and explaining the damages of a system and these tax loopholes, these tax avoidance schemes that do rob the nation and have dreadful impacts on the population, because these corporations have no heart or soul. They are greedy monsters, and they will eat and eat and eat and eat till they pick down to the bare bones. And turning Britain into a tax haven is a threat against British people and against the very structure of our United Kingdom. So like I say, Michael Gove, let's go and have a look at the law, shall we? So here's EU law. The European Union defines terrorism for legal official purposes in Article 1 of the Framework Decision on Combating Terrorism 2002. This provides that terrorist offences are certain criminal offences set out in a list consisting largely of serious offences against persons and property that, given their nature or context, may seriously damage a country or an international organisation where committed with the aim of seriously intimidating a population or unduly compelling a government or international organisation to perform or abstain from performing any act, or seriously destabilising or destroying the fundamental political, constitutional, economic or social structures of a country or an international organisation. So, not only have your government, Mr. Gove, attacked the very Constitution of Britain, abused the Constitution in terms of unlawfully proroguing Parliament, also attacking our judiciary as well, in actually the government turning around and telling the judiciary, the Supreme Court, that they're wrong and that actually they're corrupt, that the judgment is simply to stop Brexit. But also causing significant damage to our economy, with your Tory party backers and members actually betting against the British currency, and who stand to receive huge sums. The fall of the pound falls, which means absolute destitution for millions more of British people who are already suffering under austerity. How much more evil can you be? According to EU law, Michael Gove, what you're doing does amount to a terrorist threat against our nation and actually against the EU itself, and you're colluding with hostile foreign powers who stand against everything that the EU stands for, stand against all our rights, and you're colluding with corporate interests, with direct interests in opposing EU tax regulations. And they clamp down on tax havens. These corporate interests who entirely want to keep their tax breaks and loopholes and their fraudulent businesses and their tax havens. So this is an attack. And it is an attack involving foreign powers that your government, your party have been colluding with, and that even you employed a corporate entity, social engineering firm, to use as a weapon, weaponised, to target British citizens through their Facebook as individuals, to employ cyber armies, to boost posts on Facebook, to target individuals, to breach their privacy, their data protection laws. To spread fear and disinformation and xenophobia. Attacks against minority, vulnerable social groups within Britain. But you don't have to listen to EU law. Take a look at the Security Services Act 1989. The function of the service shall be the protection of national security, and in particular its protection against threats from espionage, terrorism and sabotage, and from the activities of agents of foreign powers, and from actions intended to overthrow or undermine parliamentary democracy by political, industrial or violent means. I think all of that applies to you and your Tory party, Michael Gove. Parliament threatening parliamentary democracy, sabotaging our economy, and all to protect largely foreign powers and foreign interests. Now, you believe that MPs and British citizens who go and consult with EU members of EU Parliament or members of EU nations to ask for help in defending ourselves from this attack, this corporate attack against our rights and our economy and even the very unity of our nation. You're saying that we belong in jail, that we're committing a crime. No, because we're still in the EU, Michael Gove. We're not out of the EU yet. So every British MP is an EU citizen. And EU citizens have a right to go and visit each other and to discuss problems that we're having in our country with EU Parliament. And especially when we're being governed by a government that has abused its powers unlawfully, committed a crime actually, and even lied to the Queen and the people in order to thwart democracy so that they can protect the interests of the very corporations who are hostile towards the EU because they don't like our trade, our free trade union, and they don't like the rights that it upholds, and they don't like the power that we have to impose taxes on them in the first place and to tell them that no, you are not going to drain us of our wealth and resources and give nothing back. You're not going to store huge sums of wealth in your tax havens while the people of Europe get poorer and poorer and poorer until eventually you own us like slaves. Because as I say, we've been through 2 world wars. We understand what fascism is. And that's why, up until now, you've had to operate very covertly. And you wouldn't have gotten away with any of this without also the corporate BBC and the corporate media. People like Rupert Murdoch, who also have vested interests in avoiding EU tax regulations. And who himself will suffer. Though, you know, it is hard to imagine how really people with so much wealth, more wealth than they can actually spend in their lifetimes, begrudge giving anything to the people because your objectives are to destroy everything that we won and fought for through 2 world wars. So you can take away your little shiny plastic sword and put it away, okay, because here is our gleaming steel sword made out of British iron steel. And the full weight of it now is going to come down on you and your Tory party, Mr. Gove. Because it is you who have been operating criminally. It is you who've been colluding with foreign powers to undermine our democracy, our economy, our United Kingdom, and all of our rights. And now, I have recently asked the Labour Party to investigate the Tory party. There needs to be investigations, especially into David Cameron and this horrible woman, Mrs. Thatcher. Now deceased, but nonetheless, the investigations need to begin. Because as I've explained very clearly in this document, Intel for Brexit, okay, he was involved with her. She'd set up Britain, far-right British interests, far-right American extremists, military extremists, Israel, manufacturing illegal nuclear weapons in apartheid South Africa. And then just before Nelson Mandela comes into power, she sends him across to remove them and Oh, the British public buys them, apparently. They end up deciphering millions from the public purse went straight into the Tory party accounts. So the public pays for these bombs that we don't even know exist, but all of the money actually goes straight to the Tory party, 17.8 million and another couple of million into the pockets of people like him that organised it. The nuclear weapons don't come to Britain, they end up being stored somewhere in the Middle East. Next minute, they're saying they've gone missing. Tony Blair gets into power. British intelligence is telling him, yeah, these 3 nuclear weapons that were bought by the British government, you know, they went missing. We think Saddam Hussein's got them. In fact, we're sure he's got them. David Kelly comes along explaining that, no, actually, I know for a fact Saddam Hussein hasn't got them. Next minute, he's dead. Next minute, we're in war with Iraq, invading Iraq, bombing them with illegal depleted uranium that, again, British Parliament gets lied to when British Parliament starts asking questions with it about it. Nick Harvey, Minister of the from the Ministry of Defence, is telling Parliament, had told Parliament, no, they've been through the Geneva Weapons Convention. You know, they're perfectly legal to be used. And then in 2011, British Parliament, again a Labour MP, asked questions again. Oh, suddenly he has to explain that he'd lied. Yes, the weapons had not been through the Geneva Weapons Convention reviews. They weren't safe to be used on environmental and humanitarian grounds. So what we witness here, next minute, the prime criminal there, servant of Mrs. Thatcher, next minute, he's Prime Minister of Britain, who orchestrated all of this. And now he set the path to Brexit until we've got Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. So we understand what's been going on, Michael Gove. This has been going on for some time, hasn't it? One crime leading to another crime, to another crime, and another crime. And the crimes just get bigger and bigger and bigger, don't they? And more through covert methods, except now you're right out in the open, aren't you? Because you've really shot yourself in the foot just by the very fact that you've even come out and stated this now. Because like all narcissists, we know your tricks, what you do. You hurt your victims and then seek to prosecute the victims for the crimes that you've committed against them. That's what you're doing. It's called pulling a fast one. You're not going to get away with it. Like I say, face the sword, the gleaming, shiny, steel, iron sword of justice. And your scales are imbalanced. Because your cockeyed thinking will not pass British intelligence. And I am a British citizen. And British people are intelligent. When people are given the facts, British people are rational, sane people. We are intelligent, and you will not get past our intelligence. Because you are stupid people. Because only stupid people would even invest in such a disgusting, broken down economic system, would even have supported it or bailed it out or even murdered 130,000 people through austerity, and meanwhile building up £1 trillion debt. How is that possible? That, 750 billion was the national debt when David Cameron came into power. It now stands at £1 trillion, and after we've had every public service cut. How does that work? And how much have you squandered on your Brexit? for nothing more than protecting your own tax havens. A terrorist attack against Britain, according to EU law, according to the British Security Services Act 1989, actually a threat against our national security. Sabotage. Who belongs in jail? Who's been colluding with the enemy? Who's not had just one hand tied behind the back, but actually two hands tied behind the back? Whose corporate press has been citing the main opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, as Stalin? By what right has anybody got to compare Jeremy Corbyn to Stalin on behalf of a government that's murdered 130,000 of its own citizens and now wants to impose Brexit for nothing more than to protect your crown territories, your tax havens, and that openly wants to turn Britain into a tax haven? And, you know, like it explains here, tax havens like Jersey has never had a general election in its entire history. So no democracy. That's why you're not bothered if the Conservative Party falls apart, because you won't need a Conservative Party. The Conservative Party will be in power forever, won't you, if you get your way? So there you go. There's the law. You're going to have a rethink. You criminals, we've got the background to you. There are going to be investigations into this nuclear business and the money that was pilfered from the public purse that has shored the Tory party up from strength to strength, crime to crime. There's going to be investigations into the lot of it. Because this level of crime and criminality cannot go on. It has to end somewhere, and it's going to end with us, because you're not going to break our free trade union.